It was 10 minutes past 5 on a Friday, when the office was almost empty, and Ryan Carter was this close to finishing his report and going home. Then Olivia Grant, the CEO of Grant Tech, the woman who made grown men reroute their morning commute just to avoid sharing an elevator with her, walked straight to his desk, dropped to her knees, and crawled underneath it. She looked up at him from the floor, voice barely a whisper. "Act natural. Just keep working." Down the hall, footsteps were getting closer. Ryan put his hands back on the keyboard and had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Ryan Carter was 32 years old and had spent the last 4 years doing exactly one thing with his life: showing up doing the work and leaving before 6. He was a developer at Grant Tech, a mid-sized tech company in Seattle that had grown fast enough to matter, but not so fast that anyone stopped caring about headcount. He was good at his job, not exceptional, not the kind of good that got you into rooms where decisions were made, just the reliable kind, the kind that meant his manager never had to think about him. That was fine. That was the plan. On his desk, between his monitor and a half-empty coffee mug, sat a small drawing on lined paper. A bright orange dinosaur with lopsided arms, holding what appeared to be a flower, or possibly a sword. His daughter Lily had drawn it the week before and tucked it into his laptop bag with a note that said, "For when you're sad, look here." Ryan was not sad, but he kept it on the desk anyway. It was a Friday. The floor was nearly empty by 5 o'clock. Most of his colleagues had already logged off and slipped out the way people did on Fridays, when no one was watching the clock. Ryan stayed because he had a deadline and because he was the kind of person who finished things before leaving. His phone sat face up on the desk, and sometime around 4:30, it had buzzed with a voice message from Lily sent right after school. Let out. He played it through one earbud while scrolling through a pull request. Lily's voice came through small and certain, the way it always did when she was reporting something she considered factually important. "Dad, today my teacher asked what you do for work, and I said you type on a computer all day." She laughed. I don't know why. There was a short silence, then a rustling sound. Then the message ended. Ryan smiled at his screen and kept typing. He needed to be out the door by 5:45 to pick her up on time. That was the plan. That was always the plan. He heard her before he saw her. Not footsteps exactly, more like the shift in pressure that happens when someone is moving fast and trying not to look like it. Ryan glanced up from his monitor and saw Olivia Grant crossing the open floor toward him, her phone gripped in one hand, her eyes doing a quick sweep of every desk she passed. Most people in the building had an Olivia Grant story. She had taken over the company from her father 6 years ago when it was bleeding money and had turned it around through what people described, depending on how much they liked her, as either brilliant discipline or controlled brutality. She did not stop to chat. She did not do small talk. Employees had been known to take the stairs 3 floors rather than share an elevator with her for 30 seconds. Ryan had spoken to her directly exactly twice. Both times had been in group settings. Both times, she had not looked at him long enough for it to count. She was looking at him now. She stopped at his desk, the only occupied desk in the row tucked into the far corner, where the overhead light had been flickering for 2 weeks, and nobody had fixed it. And without a word, without asking, without any expression that suggested she found this situation unusual in any way. She crouched down and moved under the desk. Her face was level with his elbow. She looked straight up at him and said very quietly, "Act natural. Just keep working." Then she pulled out her phone, typed something, and Ryan's monitor lit up with a Slack notification. Internal channel. The message read, "Don't look down. Don't stand up. I'll explain in a minute." Ryan looked at the message. He looked at the hallway. He looked at the small drawing of the orange dinosaur on his desk. He put his hands back on the keyboard and did not type anything. The clock on his screen read 5:08. He needed to leave by 5:45 to make it to Lily's school before aftercare closed. He had never been late, not once in 4 years. The woman who ran the program had his number memorized and had told him exactly once, pleasantly, but clearly what happened to kids whose parents hadn't arrived by 6 o'clock. He was thinking about all of this when another Slack message came through. "Can you just stay for 20 minutes? That's all I need." Ryan read the message. He looked at the hallway again. Down the corridor, he could hear the low murmur of voices, at least 2 people moving in the direction of this floor. He thought about how easy it would be to stand up right now, to say out loud to no one in particular that he didn't know what was happening and had no interest in finding out. He could pick up his bag, walk to the elevator, and be in his car in 4 minutes. No one could reasonably blame him for that. Whatever this was, it wasn't his problem. He typed back, "Okay, but I have to leave at 5:45. The reply came immediately. 20 minutes. He kept his hands on the keyboard. He did not stand up. The explanation came in pieces. Short, Slack messages sent from somewhere below his knees. Daniel Brooks had just arrived on the floor. No appointment. No advance notice. Ryan didn't recognize the name at first, and then he did 2 weeks ago in the break room. On the 12th floor, he'd half listened to 2 people from the legal team talking in low voices about a certain investor who had a habit of showing up unannounced. The phrase they'd used was, "drop and sign appear without warning, present paperwork in a casual setting, apply just enough social pressure that the other person signs before they've had time to think about it or call anyone." Ryan hadn't paid much attention at the time. It had seemed like someone else's problem. The next message came through. "He wants me to confirm a clause in an amendment. Small language change, he'll say. It's not small. If I sign it without my attorney present, I lose veto rights on certain strategic decisions. My attorney is 20 minutes away. I just need Daniel not to find me for 20 minutes. Ryan read the messages twice. He understood the math. He understood what she was asking, and more importantly, what she wasn't asking. She was not asking him to lie, or to cause a scene, or to do anything that would make his life harder than it already was. She was asking him to sit at his desk and act like a person who was sitting at his desk. He was already doing that. He just had to keep doing it with someone hiding underneath. He typed, "Understood." He moved his coffee mug 2 inches to the left. He pulled up the report he'd been working on. He fixed his eyes on the screen and breathed evenly and reminded himself that this was temporary, that 20 minutes from now he would be walking to his car, and that none of this was complicated as long as he didn't make it complicated. Then the elevator at the end of the hall opened, and a man in a charcoal blazer stepped out. Daniel Brooks was 55 and looked like someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where other people were nervous. He wasn't tall, wasn't particularly imposing, but he moved through the space the way people do when they've never once had to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. A younger man followed 2 steps behind him, phone already out scrolling through something that required his full attention. Daniel's eyes traveled across the empty desks, passed over the dark monitors and abandoned chairs, and landed on the one corner of the floor that still had a light on. Ryan kept his eyes on his screen. Daniel Brooks smiled the way people smile when they've already decided something and started walking toward the only occupied desk on the floor. Ryan's hand stayed on the keyboard. Somewhere below him, the CEO of the company he worked for was sitting cross-legged on an office floor in a gray vest that probably cost more than his monthly rent, waiting for him to do nothing unusually well. He could do that. He was good at that. Daniel Brooks stopped at Ryan's desk, the way people stop at things they've already decided to examine, not with curiosity, but with the mild patience of someone who knows the outcome and is simply waiting for it to arrive. He glanced at the monitor, at the open report on the screen, at the coffee mug and the orange dinosaur drawing, and then at Ryan, and he smiled the kind of smile that didn't require anything back. "Working late," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "Just finishing up a report," Ryan said. His voice came out even. He was mildly surprised by this. Daniel introduced himself. First name? Last name. A brief mention of his role as a board-level investor, in the smooth, unhurried way of someone who had said those same words several hundred times and no longer needed to think about them. Ryan nodded and gave his own name and title, and Daniel nodded back as though he'd already known both. Behind him, the younger assistant had drifted a few steps away and was holding his phone to his ear, speaking quietly to someone on the other end about conference room availability on the executive floor. Ryan kept his eyes on Daniel. He did not look down. "What project are you on right now?" Daniel asked, shifting his weight, slightly settling in. His tone was conversational, the kind of casual interest that had nothing to do with actually wanting to know the answer. He was filling time, waiting for his assistant to sort out whatever needed sorting out. Ryan understood this, and he also understood that being the thing Daniel was using to fill time was in this specific moment exactly where he needed to be. Ryan talked about the project. He kept the explanation accurate and just technical enough to require a follow-up describing the back-end restructuring his team had been running for the past 6 weeks, the integration issues they'd hit in the 3rd week, the way they'd rerouted the data pipeline to reduce latency. He watched Daniel's eyes stay politely engaged, in the way eyes do when someone is listening without hearing, and he kept going anyway. Because every sentence was 12 seconds, Daniel wasn't walking further down the hall. Under the desk, nothing moved. Ryan didn't look. He had decided somewhere in the first 30 seconds of this conversation that the only way to get through it was to act as though the space below his knees simply didn't exist. His phone screen lit up on the desk. The contact name read Lily, and beneath it the word video in small letters. Ryan looked at it. Daniel was mid-sentence about something related to Q4 targets, and Ryan nodded along and reached over and declined the call in one motion, keeping his face neutral. Daniel didn't stop talking. 12 seconds later, the phone lit up again. Same name, same icon. Ryan turned the phone face down on the desk. He knew exactly what was happening on the other end. Lily got out of school at 4:45, and on days when the aftercare program was wrapping up and she hadn't spotted him yet, she would wait by the front gate and call. She would call once, and if he didn't answer, she would call again, because she was 7, and she was practical, and she didn't see any reason why calling twice wouldn't work, when calling once hadn't. She wasn't scared exactly. She was just waiting the way kids wait when they've been told someone is coming, and they're old enough to track time, but not old enough to stop watching the gate. Ryan kept his hands on the desk. He kept his face where it was. The phone stayed face down. The Slack notification was a small vibration on his monitor. He'd set the display to show message previews only on hover, so Daniel couldn't read it from where he was standing. Ryan let his eyes move there for half a second. The preview read, 12 minutes. Keep him there. Ryan looked back at Daniel, who had drifted into a remark about market positioning in the Pacific Northwest, still filling time. Ryan waited for a natural gap in the sentence, and then said, "Can I ask from your perspective, how do you think about the product roadmap in a market that's moving this fast? I'd be curious to hear how you assess that kind of risk." It was the kind of open question that had no short answer. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Not surprised, just recalibrating, and he began to respond with the measured authority of someone who had been asked this question or a version of it many times before and had a considered position on it. Ryan listened. He nodded in the right places. He asked a small follow-up when Daniel reached a natural stopping point, just enough to extend the thread without making it obvious he was extending it. He was not a person who did this. He had never in 4 years at this company deliberately prolonged a conversation with anyone above his direct manager. He was not sure where the words were coming from, but they kept arriving, and Daniel kept responding, and the clock on his monitor kept moving. Then the laptop shifted. It was a small movement, barely a tremor, the kind of thing that could have been caused by anything. But it was enough. Ryan felt it through his elbows before he saw it on the screen, a slight wobble in the monitor that had no explanation in the room, as Daniel would understand it. Ryan moved his arm to the keyboard and typed a random string of letters he immediately deleted, as if adjusting something. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went to the desk. "Did you hear something, Most?" he asked. "Old building," Ryan said. "The ventilation on this floor runs under the subfloor, makes noise sometimes, especially end of day when the system cycles down." He had absolutely no idea if this was true. It sounded true enough. He clicked open a file on his screen, the Q3 performance summary his team had finalized the previous week, and turned the monitor a few degrees toward Daniel. "Actually, since you're here, I was going to send this up the chain next week anyway. Our Q3 numbers just came in. You might find the retention figures interesting." Daniel's eyes moved to the screen. Ryan kept talking. He walked through the numbers with the calm, organized delivery of someone presenting in a room full of people, not standing at his own desk on a Friday after 5, with his phone face down and his CEO on the floor. He pointed to the retention curve, the month-over-month active user growth, the drop in churn that had come after the pipeline restructure he'd described earlier. He made it connect. He made it feel like a conversation Daniel had been moving toward all along. Daniel studied the screen. He asked 2 questions. One about the methodology behind the churn calculation. One about how the numbers compared to the same period the previous year. Ryan answered both. He felt the tension in his shoulders with complete clarity, and ignored it with equal clarity, the way he'd learned to ignore a lot of things over the past 4 years, when ignoring them was the only productive option available. For a moment, it seemed like it might hold. Daniel was engaged, his assistant was still on the phone, and the floor was quiet enough that Ryan could hear the ventilation system doing whatever it actually did, which turned out to be something low and steady that worked in his favor. Then the sound came from under the desk. It was sharper than the first one, a distinct knock, something solid connecting with something else solid. Not loud. But in a quiet office, on a quiet floor, at the end of a quiet Friday, it carried. Ryan felt his stomach drop about 2 inches below its normal position. He kept his eyes on the screen. He did not move. Daniel straightened. He was not smiling anymore. He looked at the desk, not the monitor, not Ryan, but the desk itself, with the focused attention of someone who has just registered something that doesn't fit and is now deciding what to do with that information. The assistant on the phone had gone quiet. The floor had gone quiet. The ventilation system was the only thing that hadn't noticed anything had changed. Daniel looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Daniel. The Q3 performance summary was still open on the screen, the retention curve going up, and to the right, entirely indifferent to the situation. Daniel asked his question slowly, with the measured delivery of a man who already suspected the answer and was mostly asking as a formality. "Is there someone under that desk?" Ryan answered first. He didn't plan it. There was no calculation, no strategy, just the half-second window between Daniel's question landing and Olivia moving, and something in Ryan decided to fill it before he could think about whether that was a good idea. "That's my fault," Ryan said. He kept his voice level the way he kept his voice level when he was on a call with a client, and something had just gone wrong on the back end, and he needed 30 seconds to fix it without anyone noticing. "I asked Ms. Grant to take a look at a cable connection issue under the desk. We've been having intermittent signal drops across this whole row of machines. It's been affecting 3 workstations since Wednesday. I was going to put in an IT ticket, but she happened to walk by and she knows the system layout, so." He gestured vaguely at the underside of the desk. "Bad timing. I'm sorry." The explanation was not good. It had at least 2 obvious problems, and Ryan was aware of both of them in real time. But it didn't need to be good. It just needed to occupy 4 seconds of Daniel's attention, which it did long enough for Olivia to straighten up from under the desk and stand in one controlled motion, as though she had simply been waiting for the right moment to surface. Her gray vest was unrumpled. Her hair was exactly where it had been when she'd walked across the floor 20-some minutes ago. Ryan had no idea how that was possible. But it was, and it mattered, because the first thing Daniel saw when he looked at her was not a woman who had been caught hiding. It was a woman who had chosen when to appear. The two remaining people on the far side of the floor had stopped typing. No one said anything. The ventilation system continued its low, indifferent hum. Daniel looked at Olivia. He looked at Ryan. He looked back at Olivia, and the smile that came onto his face was slow and knowing, not the polished one he'd been wearing since he stepped off the elevator, but something older and less managed. The smile of someone who had been in enough rooms to recognize when a play hadn't gone the way he'd planned and had decided to find it interesting rather than admit he was annoyed. Ryan felt the inside of his chest do something unpleasant. He had just told a barely credible story to a board-level investor in front of his own CEO. He did not know the specific HR language for what that was, but he was fairly certain it was not a performance review highlight. Olivia didn't look at Ryan. She looked at Daniel, and she looked at her watch, a single deliberate glance, and when she spoke, her voice was exactly what it always was: composed, direct, the voice of someone who set the terms. "Danielle," she said, "my attorney just arrived downstairs. If you'd like to go over the amendment, we can do that now in the conference room with everyone present." The room held whatever it was, holding for one long moment. Daniel's smile didn't disappear. It just changed shape slightly the way expressions do when the person wearing them is making a quiet internal adjustment. He had arrived on this floor with a specific plan: show up without warning, catch her in an unstructured moment, present the paperwork in a context where saying, "Let me think about this," would feel awkward and small. It was a method that worked because it relied on the other person being unprepared. Olivia Grant was prepared. She had been prepared the entire time, sitting on the floor of an open-plan office in a $1,000 vest, waiting for her attorney to clear the lobby. He nodded. The nod was smooth, unhurried, the kind of nod that concedes nothing while acknowledging everything. "Of course," he said. "Let's do that." He turned toward the elevator without another word. His assistant, who had ended his phone call at some point during the last 60 seconds and had been standing very still ever since, fell into step behind him. The elevator opened. They stepped in. The doors closed. The floor was quiet again. Ryan did not move for a moment. He was aware of the two people on the other side of the room who had resumed the performance of looking at their screens. He was aware of his phone still face down on the desk. He was aware that his shoulders had been somewhere around his ears for the past several minutes and were only now beginning to descend. Olivia was still standing next to his desk. She looked at the space where Daniel had been standing, then at the desk itself, then at Ryan. Something moved across her face that he didn't have a name for. Not gratitude, exactly. Not embarrassment, exactly. Something quieter than both. For the first time since he'd seen her crossing the floor toward him, she didn't seem to know what to do with her hands. Ryan picked up his phone and turned it over. 2 missed calls, both from Lily. The time on the screen read 5:41. He stood up and reached for his bag. "I need to go pick up my daughter," he said. Olivia opened her mouth. He had the sense she had several things she could say, and was sorting through them quickly, the way she probably sorted through everything efficiently, without wasted motion. But before she landed on any of them, Ryan had pulled his jacket off the back of his chair and lifted his bag onto his shoulder. He wasn't being rude. He genuinely needed to leave. He nodded once in her direction, the way you nod at someone when words feel like too much and silence feels like too little, and walked toward the elevator. Behind him, he heard her voice, quiet enough that he almost missed it. "Go." He didn't turn around. The elevator opened, and he stepped in. And as the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of her standing next to his desk, looking down at the space under it, like she was still working something out. He made it to the school at 5:53. Mrs. Paulson, who ran the aftercare program and had his number memorized and had explained exactly once what happened to children whose parents hadn't arrived by 6, was standing near the front gate with 2 other children and an expression that was professionally neutral but contained a layer of something Ryan had learned to read correctly over the past 2 years. He apologized. She accepted it. He signed the clipboard. Lily was sitting on the low brick wall near the entrance, her backpack between her feet, eating a cracker from a small plastic bag with the focused energy of someone who had decided to be fine about the situation and was executing on that decision. She saw him and slid off the wall. "You didn't answer," she said. Not accusatory, just factual. Lily delivered most things factually. "I know," Ryan said. "I'm sorry, Bug. I got held up." She considered this for a moment, apparently decided it was sufficient, and took his hand. They walked to the car. He buckled her in, and she ate another cracker, and by the time they pulled out of the parking lot, she had moved on to a detailed account of something that had happened at lunch involving a juice box and a misunderstanding she felt had been resolved unfairly. Ryan drove and listened, and made the appropriate noises at the appropriate times, and somewhere on the bridge he felt the last of the tension from the past hour leave his body in a slow, deliberate way, like air going out of something that had been inflated too long. At home, Lily had a peanut butter sandwich, and Ryan had leftover soup from the night before, and they sat at the kitchen table the way they always sat. Lily's legs swinging because the chair was slightly too tall for her. Ryan's laptop closed and pushed to the side because he had a rule about that. It was a rule he'd made for himself 2 years ago, and he had kept it every single night since. "Dad," Lily said around a bite of sandwich. "Why were you late?" "I was helping someone at work," he said. Lily processed this. Helping with what? Ryan looked at his soup. He looked at his daughter. He made a decision. "Helping my boss hide," he said. Lily stopped chewing. Her eyes went wide, not alarmed, just recalibrating the way they did when information arrived that required a new mental category. Hide from who? From a man who wanted her to sign something she wasn't ready to sign. Where did she hide for? Under my desk. Lily stared at him for a long moment with the grave, assessing expression she deployed when she wasn't sure if she was being told a real thing or a simplified thing designed for children. Then she looked at him with complete seriousness and asked, "Is your desk big enough for that?" Ryan thought about it. He thought about Olivia Grant, gray vest phone in hand, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the 12th floor of a Grant Tech office building at 5:15 on a Friday afternoon, waiting for 20 minutes to pass. "Apparently," he said. Lily nodded, finished her sandwich, and asked if they could watch something before bed. Ryan said yes. They did. She fell asleep before the second episode ended, the way she always did when she swore she wasn't tired, and Ryan carried her to her room and stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he always did, making sure she was actually asleep, and not just pretending, which she had been known to do. Monday morning, Ryan was at his desk by 8:30. The office was at its normal volume. Keyboards, low voices, the elevator opening and closing at regular intervals. He put his bag down, moved his coffee mug to its usual position, and noticed a small envelope sitting on the center of his desk. Plain white. No name on the outside. He picked it up, opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper folded once, and on it, in handwriting that was straight and clean and used no more space than it needed. "Your desk is just wide enough." "Oh, gee." Ryan read it once. He read it again. He set it down on the desk and looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and folded it carefully along its original crease. He looked at the orange dinosaur drawing that was still sitting where it always sat, between the monitor and the coffee mug arms. 2 short, flower or possibly sword held in one fist, drawn by a 7-year-old who wanted her dad to have something to look at when things felt hard. He tucked the folded note next to it. The two pieces of paper sat side by side, the dinosaur in orange marker, the note in clean black ink, and did not have anything to do with each other, except that they were both on his desk, which was apparently wide enough. Ryan sat down. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the report he'd been working on Friday evening, the one he'd never quite finished, and started where he'd left off. Around him, the office filled in gradually voices and footsteps, and the small daily sounds of people settling into another week. He didn't look up when the elevator opened. He didn't look toward the executive floor. He just kept working the way he always did, which was, as it turned out, the only thing anyone had ever asked him to do.